8, 9. Yeah, we are live now. You can start, comrade.
Sanibonani maswati lamahle, sanibonani live lonke lakangwane emagumbini onke emhlaba netingalo tonke taseSwatini nangaphandle lonibingelelako comrade Velaphi Mamba. Siyajabula kuthola lethuba namhla noma inhliziyo tethu tibuhlungu. Siyajabula ukuthi sibe nani namuhla. Umuntu nje latakusho ukuthi this is an English session. So sawukhuluma ngesingisi from now going forward. Good evening everyone in Swaziland, and I would like to greet you. As you know, my name is Velaphi Mamba, and I'm presently studying here in the United States. It is my honor to host you today for this memorial service for our brother, our friend and comrade, beloved comrade Thulani Masego, who is deceased and was tragically assassinated last week and laid to rest earlier today. We want to take this opportunity to really pay tribute to him, to salute his spirit, and really just to celebrate the massive contribution that he has made to the world, to the African continent, and also to the people of Swaziland. I think that all of us can agree that Comrade Thulani's contribution speaks for itself in the manner in which people globally on the African continent and also in Swaziland have responded to his tragic assassination. And that is testimony to the kind of person that he was. Really a towering giant in the era of, in the space of human rights, a bright legal scholar, someone who was indefatigable and respected the world over. So we thought that it would be important to create this opportunity, not only to celebrate him, but also to mourn him and give ourselves the time and the space to reflect about what his life meant and also what it means for the country going forward and for the struggle for democracy and change in Swaziland, which we understand to be a noble struggle and a struggle whose time has come. So at this moment, I would like to welcome every one of our speakers here who are online ready to speak. I would like to welcome my colleagues who are here with me and everyone who is following these proceedings on Facebook, on Zoom and other social media platforms. Thank you for making the time to mourn with us. So at this stage, I am going to invite Comrade Thuli Makama to take us through with her reflections about Comrade Thulani Masego. And then from there, we'll move on to the next speaker. Over to you, Comrade Thuli, and thank you for being here. Please unmute.
Oh, thank you, Velaphi, and thank you, everyone, colleagues who are on this call. Indeed, like Velaphi has said, we are gathering here tonight to continue reflecting, celebrating, and in some way mourning, the unnecessary death that was visited upon Comrade Thulani. Thulani Masego, I've known him since his university days from far, but when he completed university, we began interacting and our paths were colliding in a number of spaces. And what's particular about where our paths were meeting, it's that it was always when we were talking human rights, democracy, and constitutionalism. And that is where you'd always find Thulani. So it's not surprising that when you reflect on Thulani's life, you find that in all aspects of his life, he was consistent. Consistent in being an advocate of human rights, justice, political emancipation, democracy, and constitutionalism. So I'll just give us maybe examples of how Thulani lived this life up to his last day. Thulani was a lawyer, had his own practice, and his law firm was practically a school for human rights for a number of lawyers. He was always prepared to have lawyers come through his practice to do their apprenticeship or articles, as we call them. And in that space, you'd see him, you'd watch him actually trying to ensure that those lawyers who went through his offices appreciate the human rights-based lawyering approach. So he did that for lawyers who were on their way to being professional attorneys, and he also, reached out to peers in the legal space, lawyers who had their own fully fledged practices, and really tried hard to inculcate this ethic and this consideration for human rights in the way that lawyers carry on their work. So that was Thulani in the law space and as a legal professional. So it's not surprising that whenever he could, he would never miss a chance to intervene when there were injustices that were happening. So when you look at his profile, you'll see how he's represented indigent people for free. He's also gone to court in his own name to challenge the system whenever he felt it was acting ultra vires, and not being respectful to constitutional principles. We've also seen Thulani where he could actually setting up different outfits like the Lawyers for Human Rights, the NCA, the Constitutional Assembly, so many outfits that had one purpose only, and the purpose was to ensure that the conversations, the national conversations around democracy and constitutionalism are carried on, and they are being done in a way that leads to changes in the governance system of the country. So that was Thulani, the lawyer, always prepared to use the law and his skill as a lawyer to represent anything human rights, anything political democracy, and constitutionalism. And that journey took him not just to the local courts, but we saw him going into international spaces. Just a few months ago, maybe 2, actually, he was out in the Gambia doing exactly that at the Commission for Human Rights. So that is how Thulani was. And then when you look at his life and you look at how consistent he was, you are struck by how even within his family, his immediate family, it's apparent that they understood what he stood for, and also they embraced his principles, because he wasn't a forceful person. So he would really work with you to try and make sure that you had a full appreciation of what his mission was about. And his mission in the Swaziland context was to ensure that there is a national dialogue, and the national dialogue is geared towards ushering in a constitutional democracy for the country. So within his family, you'd see, for instance, even his late mom, although she was pained by all that Thulani had to go through because of his convictions, but she was really supportive. She was very supportive. She would complain about how maybe he should stop writing. If they're arresting him for writing, then maybe he shouldn't be writing anymore. But she was saying that in a very supportive fashion. So that was Thulani. He took all of himself into the space, into the struggle. And just this morning, watching the funeral, I was moved to see his young son actually saluting with a fist, at many points during the funeral procession. And that to me said that is truly Tulani's son, young as he is, 6 years old, but he has an appreciation of, what his father stood for. And I guess even in his very young mind, he could sense that this must be about justice. This must be about saluting my father for the man that he was. And that conviction that Tulani had about, engagement, about dialogue, and about, the reality that, or at least the belief that engagement and dialogue would lead us to a constitutional change in Swaziland, actually saw him engaging, even with those who didn't quite like him and those who didn't agree with him. So he just kept going back. He'd go back to government with the same message. He'd go back to the international community, those who have missions in the country and those who are resident in neighboring countries. His mission was to preach, engagement, peaceful engagement and dialogue, so that it takes us to a place where we are all enjoying constitutional democracy, never a violent man. So it makes it so painful that despite all the peaceful, demeanor and means that he used throughout his life to engage even with adversaries, he had to, he had to be killed in the manner that he was, be assassinated actually, in front of his family, in front of his kids, leaving them with an indelible trauma, seeing their father in that space. So it boggles the mind why anyone would give an instruction over TR's life, because if anything, TR has always been a bridge, for peaceful engagement and non-violent engagement, and all he wanted was an inclusive dialogue that would take the country into a constitutional democracy. Maybe I can end there for now.
Okay, thank you so much, Comrade Tuli, for those reflections. Indeed, very, very true about his life. Thank you very much. We really appreciate this. And I will hand over now to Comrade Brian. I understand that he is now online. Comrade Brian, apologies for the mix-up of the time. In my mind, I thought that the UK president is 1 hour behind, or ahead rather, but it seems like it's 2 hours. So, but please go on and give us your reflections.
Thank you, Comrade Velapia. My camera, for some reason, will not unmute. So I've been trying to unmute the camera.
We'll try and get you unmuted, Comrade.
Yeah. So it's the most painful beginning to a year I've had in a very long time. In part because although I've known Comrade TR for a very long time, we reconnected because of Sis Tuli Makama, who I think 2015 or 2016 thereabouts asked me to come and assist in
Please unmute Comrade Brian now. You should be able to. Yes. Perfect. Thank you. Can see you now. Go ahead.
I was saying that although I've known Comrade TR for a very long time, we reconnected as a result of a request by Sis Tuli, who's just spoken before me, for me to come and work with political parties, trade unions, and civil society around 2015, preparing for what was supposed to be a dialogue with the monarchy. In reconnecting with Comrade TR, it was a touching moment because I'm one of those who had followed and campaigned for his release. And I had not seen him post his, I used to tease him, his Robben Island experience. And he was a man, there are many things that are going to be said about Thulani. Thulani was a complex blend of many things. A deeply reflective man, and when necessary, a playful character, a humorous comrade, and witty. He would always have a response to something in a very gentle but incisive way. When I heard the news of the assassination, I was reminded of a speech by Amilcar Cabral, given on the 13th of May at the state funeral of Kwame Nkrumah, 13th of May, 1972, just barely a year after Thulani was born. This was Amilcar Cabral's last public speech, given at the state funeral of Kwame Nkrumah and in Conakry. And allow me to read just a little excerpts from it. Cabral says, "What to say? But we must speak, otherwise at this point, if we do not talk, our hearts may burst. Our tears should not infiltrate the truth. We freedom fighters, we do not mourn the death of a man, even a man who was a comrade and an exemplary revolutionary. Because as President Sekou Toure often said, what is man in front of the infinite being and transgressing of the people and humanity? We do not mourn the people of Ghana scoffed in its most beautiful realizations and the most legitimate aspirations. We're not crying for Africa betrayed. We're mourning, yes, of hatred towards those who were able to betray Nkrumah to serve the ignoble imperialism. Mr. President, Africa, by requiring through the voice of the people of the Republic of Ghana, is always fairly represented by President Sekou Toure, who Nkrumah had put his right place on the Kilimanjaro's highest summits of the African Revolution. Africa rehabilitates itself and through history. President Nkrumah, which we honor, is primarily the great strategist of the struggle against classic colonialism. He is the one who created what we call African positivism, what he called positive action, affirmative action. We pay tribute to the declared enemy of neocolonialism in Africa and elsewhere, the strategist of economic development in his country. Mr. President, we praise the freedom fighter of the African people who always gave his full support to national liberation movements, the heroic no of the people. It is also true that if we went through the struggle regenerated, it was essentially due to the concrete support of Nkrumah. Many of you will be tempted to reduce Thulani into a Swati hero. Many of you knew an installment of this dear comrade, and as Thuli has attempted to do, and as you know, Comrade Bamba, Thulani was involved in struggles for democratization across the African continent. There is no country where repression of human rights defenders, a repression of pro-democracy activists, a repression of women and young people occurred that Thulani did not get involved in one capacity or the other. There'll be very few men who would qualify to be equated with Che Guevara in the current African social struggles, but Thulani will be one of those. Siposami Malunga narrated how just last month or two, when he was being tried by the Zimbabwean government in the dispute he has with it over his farm, Thulane pitched up in the middle of nowhere to observe the trial. Just last night, there was a night vigil by Kenyan activists. Thulane is a seed that you planted on this continent, a seed that has flourished to nurture, to re-energize what we all thought had died with the moment of Mandela, which is true Pan-African solidarity and activism. The same that Nkrumah would refer to as injustice anywhere in Africa is also injustice everywhere. These are the same words uttered by Martin Luther King Jr. as well. I want to suggest to you that as we celebrate the life of Thulane Rudolph Maseko, we must keep this in mind. Autocratic regimes across the world are learning the worst practices from each other. They win in part because they will portray those fighting for rights as unpatriotic and enemies of state. They will win in part because they capture institutions such as the judiciary and parliaments. They capture the media, both public and private. They will win in part because they convert and pay amongst our own folks whose ambition is driven by profile and headline hugging. They will win in part because we accept to despair. We accept to be defeated. We accept to have fear instilled in us. I want to suggest that the noise must not just be for this week. It must not just be for this period of mourning. Thulane himself never allowed a matter to die until it had been resolved in the interest of justice. It would be a great betrayal if we allowed his assassination to come to an end when the period of mourning ends. My appeal as we celebrate his life is to remember the one who was in the Gambia, in Kenya, in Cameroon, the one who was in Guinea, the one who was in Uganda, in Zimbabwe, in DRC, the one who was in Mozambique, the one who was in South Africa, in Namibia, fighting alongside the oppressed, the dispossessed, the dehumanized, was interred today. He was laid to rest. And his challenge to those of us who remain is, what will you do with the cause of justice? What will you do with the cause of transformation, not just in Eswatini, but across the continent? Because the enablers of authoritarianism are transnational. The enablers of authoritarianism cross borders. The instruments and the agents that are used to enforce this crude violence against those who fight for freedom are taken from different countries across the world and across the continent. I think we must commit ourselves as we celebrate his life, not just for Tenele and his son, not just for Eswatini. We must commit ourselves for Africa and for the broader world, that another world is possible where autocratic monarchs, where assassins, where enemies of progress, enemies of democracy, of human rights are not allowed to thrive. I just wanted to end by reminding us that he's a man who also enjoyed a good revolutionary song, a good dance. And so as we mourn, in our traditions, as you know, we mourn the deceased in character. Part of our expressions of grief is to do what he would have done. He would have had a good laugh. He would have had a good dance. He would have, even in this tragedy, he would have had a wise thing to say. I want to encourage all of you here on the platform who perhaps didn't know him as well as the rest of us did, who perhaps didn't have an opportunity to work closely with him, who perhaps are only encountering or had a fleeting encounter with him. I want you to, if you can, use the hashtag I am Tulani Rodolphe Maseko, or I am Tulani Maseko, because this is a commitment to each one of us, that that bullet or those bullets could have been targeted at any one of us, but also in a positive way, that the obligation to fight for the transformation of Africa, its democratization, the end of dictatorship and authoritarianism is a collective responsibility. Go well, Mataba. Go well, Comrade Tulani. Go well, our hero.
Thank you so much, Comrade Brian, for those words. Very moving indeed. About Tulani, I think when you say that he qualified in the league of Che Guevara, I totally agree with that sentiment. Thank you very much for celebrating him in the manner you have, and for also challenging us to take up the spear and the shield and to move on, because we owe it not only to him, but also to generations of Emaswati and generations of Africans all over the world to come. At this point, I'll hand over to Comrade Sanel Siwe Makakula. Please, Comrade, unmute yourself and give us your reflections. Comrade Starkey, please unmute the comrade. Is she there? Because I can't see on the Zoom platform from this side.
She's here. She should be able to unmute herself.
Okay, please go ahead, comrade.
Sanbanan, I'm audible.
Yes, you are audible, Comrade San.
Okay. Thank you, Comrade Valapi. I'm really humbled by the opportunity to speak and honor the memory of our departed leader, Mr. Tulani Maseko. I'd like to thank everybody who has gathered, our freedom-loving friends around the world, for joining us in today's memorial. Your solidarity is felt and it's deeply appreciated. I wrote a few words because as I was thinking about what to say about Tulani, I was overwhelmed with tears, and I didn't want this to be an occasion where you all have to witness that. I think that we've cried enough in the last few days, but today is a celebration of his life well lived. On behalf of our organization, Emaswati for Change, I would just like to extend our deepest sympathies firstly to Tulani's lovely wife, Comrade Daniele Masego, their two beautiful children, and his entire family on this tragic loss. Tulani was laid to rest earlier today, and I know that for his family, the pain cuts deeper than we can imagine. So to the Masego family, we extend our gratitude for the gift you gave us as Emaswati in sharing your beloved husband, father, and brother with all of us. To our comrade Daniele Masego, when Tulani was imprisoned for criticizing the judiciary, you were his voice. Siyabonga Mike. You fought for justice for him so that we, the mass democratic movement, could continue to benefit from his leadership. We do not take for granted the toll that the struggle takes on family and your livelihoods. So for every sacrifice unknown to us, for every gain in our struggle that came at the expense of your family, we would like to honor you and we would like to say thank you. In 2021, when hundreds of our brothers and sisters were killed by the state's armed forces, we found ourselves in a state of shock, of grief and anger, much like today. Tulani was one of the leaders who recognized that our liberation struggle would not be sustained by our anger alone. Beyond our shared values of respect for human rights, we needed to be educated, we needed to be focused, and we needed to be grounded. Tulani never passed an opportunity to engage in political education. A year ago, on April 12, To mark 49 years since the late King Sobhuza unlawfully declared himself an absolute monarch, Thulani opened a dialogue that unpacked the impact of the 1973 proclamation. 1973, as most will know, was the genesis of royal supremacy in Swaziland. Thulani was, of course, an educator at heart, so he gave a stellar presentation, and I had just one question for him. Seeing that the Swazi struggle has been going on for decades, I asked him, what is it about the present time that gives you the conviction that we may finally see change? Without hesitation, he responded, unity is what gives me confidence that we will win. I truly believe that from beyond the grave, Thulani is calling for unity in the mass democratic movement. It's time for us to speak in one voice once again. Thulani would say, you cannot have a supreme law and then have somebody above the law. On that, no doubt, we agree. Thulani would also say, we don't want our democracy through the back door. He believed that ours is a just cause. He lived for it. He was jailed for it. And he paid the ultimate price for it, his life. Thulani was deeply pained by the violence in the country. I remember him saying, we thought we could be peaceful, but peace is gradually losing momentum. Even as he spoke these words, a sound reflection, an acknowledgement of where we are as a country, he remained resolute in the call for a nonviolent solution, an all-inclusive dialogue. Leaders, fellow Swazis, let us honor the lifelong sacrifices of Thulani Masego by demonstrating unity. Let us seek justice together. Let us stand upright on Thulani's broad shoulders with a clear program of action rooted in the values that unite us. The livelihoods of generations to come are at stake. Thulani fought for unity amongst progressive forces. He was the glue that held us together. Comrades, by our conduct, we must honor the memory of this giant of our generation. As we push forward in one voice towards a new democratic dispensation where all are equal under the law, our unity of purpose and our inevitable victory will be the legacy of Thulani Masego. May his soul rest in peace, and may his fighting spirit live within us until our freedom comes. Amandla. Thank you, comrades.
Way too. Thank you so much, Comrade Sani, for that.
Good afternoon, my friends. My name is Thulani Masego from Swaziland, as you have heard. Indeed, my wife and I are humbled and honored to become part of the Oslo Freedom Forum family. As you may know, 2 years ago, I could not attend because I was held in prison by the dictatorship ruling my country, Swaziland. Instead, my wife, my lovely wife, Danielle, who's here present today, came here to read a letter written while I was in prison. Today, I am out of jail and stand before you just to say thank you very much for your support. I'm sure without your support, I would have been kept in jail until the last day of my sentence. I do believe that I was not released early because of a sudden change in government, and that I was just in Swaziland all of a sudden. Instead, I was freed due to the fact that the pressure that you brought to bear on my government broke them down. I must say, though, that being out of jail does not mean that I'm free. You might think that the time for absolute kings is over, but I still live under a supreme and absolute monarch in Swaziland. The first time, therefore, I was sent to prison was in 2009. There had been a series of bomb explosions in my country, and I explained that this was caused by the absence of freedom of speech and expression in Swaziland. And for these words, for my statements, I was arrested for the crime of sedition. In 2014, police stormed into my office with a warrant of arrest signed by the King's Chief Justice, working together with my government. I spent a month in pretrial detention and 3 months of a sham trial. When the verdict came, I was sentenced to 2 years in prison without the option of a fine. It occurred to me that my country had failed me. You know, to be brought in court in leg irons like an animal is shameful. For my wife, my son, my young son, and my friends to be subjected to abuse when they came to visit me was a worst experience. The purpose of all this by my government was to break me down and to break my spirit so that I could give up on values that I hold so dear. But I refuse to give up. We shall never surrender, for we know there's a price to pay for the truth. I stand here to tell you about the abuse of power by my king, who's an absolute monarch. I could see how he and his cronies ruled our country. For example, citizens in my country are denied and deprived of their land and property for the king's purposes. They are evicted and removed from their lands, and they are rendered homeless and landless. This happens routinely because the king takes what he wants. This is the system which I and others are fighting against. This greed by my king and thirst for power is destroying my country. More than 60% of my people live below the poverty line. A third of them live with HIV and AIDS. Instead of the king addressing those issues, he buys himself Bentleys and Maybachs and BMWs for his 15 wives and a dozen of his children. But winds of change blew in South Africa around 1994. And when I saw Nelson Mandela democratically take over his country, was indeed moving and inspiring. I do believe that it is not right for anyone to be able to use supremacy and absolutism to suppress a people. In South Africa, it was oppression based on the color of the skin. In my country, it is based on bloodlines. These, in my view, are equally bad systems of government. Of course, for Mandela's struggle and my own brush with the draconian and oppressive regime in Swaziland, I learned that fighting for rights is something that is not an easy walk in the park. From this, I learned perhaps one of life's best lessons, that if you are persistent in what you want, if you insist in what you believe in, you are likely to get it, no matter how difficult it may be, and no matter how much the price to pay. I do believe that here in Norway, we have more than 7 major political parties. In my country, it is the reverse. We have one political party, which is the King's Party, ravaging our country. Our plea, therefore, that we are calling for a constitutional monarch, like here in Norway and other constitutional democracies. We are calling for a system where the people will have a real opportunity and capacity to form a democratic government. Change has to come peacefully through dialogue and negotiation in Swaziland. I do believe that my people desire democracy and good governance. Yes, I'm here to appeal to you for support. We need to bring pressure on the king and his government to open up the doors for dialogue. We need to name and shame this dictatorship. For I know that when I was in prison and you, people of the world, supported and spoke about us and called for our release, the king had to back down. For that, he released me and my co-accused, Peggy Makubu. I believe we can learn from that lesson And I appeal that today we need targeted pressure on the king, from the media, from democratic governments, from companies and business on the king and his family. We say that Swaziland should not access international markets unless meaningful, peaceful change is achieved. I say to you, my friends, our king and his government are destroying and ravaging our country. He needs to be held accountable. And as Obama says, change can happen. Change is possible. And until that day when change comes to my country, I will be on the road to justice. Thank you very much.
Indeed, until that day comes, we will all be on the path and the road to justice. This is such a seminal speech, which is why we decided to show it and play it here today. Because part of this lecture is also just to make sure that we preserve the richness around Comrade TR, and not just celebrate his life, but also just shine a light on the important contribution that he has made to the people of Swaziland. Having listened to him now, I also just want to singularly take the time to pass my deepest condolences to his wife, to his children, and the entire Masego family on this tragic demise of our brother. It is so moving to hear him speak to us, even as he is in his grave today. But his words will never die. His words will live forever. And there will be words that will chart a path forward for generations and generations to come. I would like to invite President Lungisi Makanya to give us his remarks. And I'm alive to the time, so please let's make sure that we are as brief as possible, because we want to end this within the hour. Over to you, President. Thank you.
Good evening to everyone, and thank you very much, Comrade Velapi, for the opportunity. And thank you to the rest of the team that has organized this memorial reflection on the life of Thulane. Please allow me, Comrade Velapi, to take full advantage of this profound clip we have just played around Thulane. Because first, maybe one must confess that I've been struggling a bit with what I was beginning to feel is an overemphasis, almost to the point of distortion of who Thulane was. This element of Thulane, a non-violent man. Because if we don't contextualize what is violence and who Thulane was, we may run a great risk of wanting to project Thulane, the violent saint, and then maybe the other activists and leaders of our struggle as the opposite, violent, rowdy individuals. And I think we would not want to do that. I am saying this because I believe he is one man I can confidently speak about, having known him very closely as I have known him. But also troubled by the fact that in a situation such as ours, the margin of error in this whole violence, non-violence debate is too dilapidating in my view, because normatively, the issue of non-violence should stand above the law. So the issue of violence should not just be reduced to what the law narrowly defined as violence. And that is where we would understand Thulane. Please allow me, Comrade Velapi, to draw on what Frantz Fanon said about violence. And because Frantz Fanon says there is violence at an individual level. And he says violence at an individual level is a cleansing force, for it rids the colonized of their inferiority complex, of their passive and despairing attitude. And I think that is where Thulane was. Thulane was a courageous, brave man, and he says it in that clip if you listened very carefully, because at a personal level, he had understood that there are certain things that requires you as a leader to stand firm on when we are fighting for. That maybe the other side may interpret as violent. And that's what Fanon says when he speaks about violence at an individual level as a liberating force. But I was also a bit excited by, again, what he says in that clip when he speaks about people who had been arrested in his country for what he termed sabotage on state what I could call state assets or state properties. And the part of me that I've been struggling with here is, again, shouldn't we, when trying to understand Thulane, also look at what was Thulane's take and posture to what we call emancipatory violence? Because in my view, and I know this was a view equally shared by Thulane, Tinkundla is a very violent system, inherently violent system. Throughout his life as an activist and as a human rights defender, Thulane had been violated on numerous occasions, not only limited to the occasions where you would have been arrested. He had been violated in his own workspace in terms of attempts to run down his legal firm. He had been violated in his own endeavor to operate and start small business in his home area. He had been violated in terms of his and his community's attempt to access land. You would remember, colleagues, that Thulane come from a background of Atibuye Masiswe, where his own communal area was said to have been a farm, and there were evictions that were taking place there. And allow me, before I finish, to speak to but two incidences where I would want to say they distinguish Thulane from the rest. One was an incident when a very elderly man from his community was arrested under the allegation that he had murdered one senior, forgotten if it was a princess, but the person was royal related in the issue of the chieftain's dispute in his area. And Thulane had to represent that old man, and the High Court denied that old man bail. And while the old man was in custody, he fell sick. And then he had to try and go for bail at the appeal court. At that time, the appeal court in Swaziland was only sitting twice a year. And the old man had to wait for the appeal court to sit. And this really bothered Thulane. And if I'm not mistaken, he managed to take out the old man on appeal, only for him to pass away few weeks after he had come out of prison. And this had a very terrible effect on Thulane, because he was adamant that that old man was never involved in the commission of that crime. The second one was the not so long ago issue of Comrade Sibia. Comrade Sibia, who had deposed an affidavit and filed it at the High Court, calling for King Mswati to be arrested for a range of what he had termed were legal acts committed by the king. The establishment only realized when the papers were to be filed that the person that is cited on the papers was the king himself, and Comrade Sibia was arrested. charged with Sedition and Suppression of Terrorism Act. And Comrade Thulane had to represent Comrade Sibiya. And during Comrade Thulane, representative of Comrade Sibiya, there was a time where the state then alleged that Comrade Sibiya was mentally unstable and referred him for mental assessment. And Thulane tried by all means to say, no, we can't merely just on the basis of him having filed these papers and all of a sudden saying he's of unsound mind. Again, Comrade Sibiya had to go through that process with very minimal support, even from the pro-democracy movement. And Comrade Thulane kept on complaining that we seem to be absent, yet he viewed this as one of the important struggles. And you will find in those appearances, it will be Comrade Thulane and his clients. So I'm trying to bring this point that Comrade Thulane was one leader who was never ashamed to take up struggles, even if it means he would have to stand there alone without crowds. And that is one distinguishing feature about Thulane. But lastly, I wanted to briefly reflect also on how Thulane liberated all of us in prison when we were extortion. At the time, we were not allowed to bring any reading material either than a Bible or a novel. And Comrade Thulane needed some books because he was busy preparing his statement from the dock, the speech that he presented when he was going through trial in 2014. So he fought that no reading material should be denied to a detainee on the basis that the authorities do not like what is contained in that reading material. And as a result of Thulane's efforts, we were also permitted to then bring in some of the politically inclined reading material that were otherwise not permitted there. He took this very same determination to Big Bend. When he was arrested there, he refused to go and do manual hard labor and insisted that the sentence was imprisonment. It was not imprisonment with hard labor. And he was saying, those who are doing hard labor may want to do it voluntarily, but it is not part and parcel of his sentence. So I'm just reflecting on this moment to demonstrate that, yes, Thulane understood that violence is destructive. He understood that it is possible to resolve conflict without employment of violence. But he understood that at times, for an individual to liberate himself from fear, he needs to, at an individual level, embrace this element of violence that Fanon is talking to. And that's why at the memorial service, a few of the speakers reflected about how Thulane during protests and rallies, when tear gas was unleashed on us, he never ran away because one of the things he had managed to conquer was fear. In conclusion, I want to talk about the role that Thulane, together with yourselves and Muzi Masuku and the rest that I mentioned, played post the June-July massacre, at a time where we had one of the most stringent and severest curfew. I think shops were closing around 3:30, and everyone was expected to be indoors by 6. Simultaneously with the situation where people were being attacked and killed by law enforcement, and we had to reconcile and put together the names and numbers of those who were injured and those who were deceased. A very difficult process because we couldn't go out there and be able to physically collate some of this information. And how he would insist that every day, at times twice a day, we must have teleconferences that he would chat and have very lengthy meetings to try and ensure that we get as much information so that we can keep the world informed and abreast about what was happening in the country. And I want to say Comrade Thulane, you played your part. You may have left us, but you left us with very rich inheritance in terms of the many victories that we will enjoy as a people because of your struggles. We know that one of the most difficult things to do today in Swaziland is to want to easily evict people on the basis that they are just land tenants. And these victories were scored after Atibuye Masiswe had launched a series of protests and at times legal challenges against these arbitrary evictions that was taking place. Already there is the issue of free primary education. There is the issue that now in prison, prisoners are allowed to bring in reading materials of their choice. There may be a limit on the number of books one can give in, but the list is endless. And these are struggles that we enjoy today because of the sacrifices of Thulane. And the best tribute for all of us that we can give to Thulane is to ensure that the higher ideals that Comrade Thulane lived, suffered, and died for are indeed realized, and that we do not see our own struggle in isolation of the global struggles. And Brian is correct to say Thulane did not just belong to us in Swaziland, he belonged to human rights defenders across the world. And we want to say thank you very much, and may his soul rest in peace. Thank you.
Amandla, thank you very much. Thank you very much, President, for that passionate speech, and we really appreciate it. I know that we are just 10 minutes shy of the hour, and I want us to make sure that at least we don't overlap too much beyond the 1 hour period. At this point, I would like to invite Comrade Sibongile Mavimbela to give us her reflections. After Comrade Sibongile Mavimbela, I will invite our Comrade Zodwa Mponda to also just go in without my intervention so that we can do the final part of the program and finish. Over to you, Comrade.
Thank you very much, Comrade Chair, and good evening and good morning in the US. I'll be very short because Comrade Lewis has taken some of my words, but I wanted to talk about Thulane and his resilient spirit. That is going to be the focus of my conversation today. Thulane, I've known him since our university days. We were together at Tugwaluseni. He was in law, I was in science, but they were the SRC of that time. And I want to recall how they went on hunger strike after they had been expelled from the university after leading a demonstration. I was part of that demonstration. A lot of us were part of that demonstration, but the SRC was victimized to a point of being expelled from the university.
You want to speak?
Thulane,
it's okay. Go ahead, Comrade, sorry.
Okay. Thulane and many others, including my brother, Linus Mavimbela, Bongan Masuku, Zandelihle Smelane, quite a number of them went on hunger strike and sat by the gate for 8 days without eating. We would go to the gate every day and cry because we saw them deteriorating to a very dangerous state. Thulane was the worst that deteriorated to a point where when we went to report our situation as a studentry to the king, as the chancellor of the university, Thulane was being carried on both sides because he was just about to die. But he would not give in. He was very stubborn. He stood for what he believed in. He was very resilient and would not be shaken by anything, even death itself. Now, I also want to talk about Thulane in the instance of the time when the MSF was initiated. We as Letfu Sonke worked very hard with Thulani in terms of trying to coordinate a process of enabling a dialogue or facilitating the development of terms of reference so that the country can go into a dialogue. Thulani has been very resilient in trying to put together organizations and institutions that do not necessarily speak the same language, that do not necessarily want the same thing, or the only common factor is that they all want the dialogue. But it has not been an easy process leading that MSF and PPA. It has not been an easy process to manage. And we've seen his resilience throughout that process. He never gave in. He never said, this is too much for me. He never said, somebody else take it over. I've got many things to take care of. He became resilient and ran through that process. So we as Lethu Sonke have lost a lot in Thulani because we relied on him on legal advice. We relied on him in steering the process of trying to facilitate terms of reference, talking to SADC, talking to many relevant stakeholders. And we've seen him leading the MSF into other countries, going to Lesotho, going to South Africa, Durban, trying to capacitate the membership into a stage where they will learn and gain experience and understand what a dialogue is all about, how to facilitate a dialogue, what kind of things to say in a dialogue. So he has been very resilient and he has been empowering to other people. And we as Lethu Sonke would really like to share that we have lost a great leader and a great facilitator of a process which we need to identify. I don't know, we need a birth of a new Thulani who will spear the process ahead. So that is just all I'm going to say about him, his spirit of resilience, and we'd like him to rest in eternal peace, and we would like him to rise in glory. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Amandla. Comrade Zodwa Mabuza, please go ahead. Comrade DP, are you there?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Yes,
Thank
please
you.
make your on behalf of the MSF.
Thank you, comrades. I want to actually say thank you for hosting me as one of the speakers today on Comrade Thulani. I'm grateful to this because by age, I'm 17 years older than Thulani, and most of the comrades or activists that are still alive. And I am now seen as an ancestor, or at least a mother, to most of the young comrades that are fighting for the democratic cause in Swaziland. I would want to start by saying 3 weeks back when we went to
President, still unmute the video, but please unmute your video.
Okay, I thought thank you.
Yes, we can see you now. Go ahead.
I was saying 3 weeks ago, we had to go to Comrade Muzi Mema's home to mourn as MSF because of the assassination that the state had made on him. And immediately we left the Mema family at the gate where Muzi Mema was taken. Thulani said to us as an executive in the MSF, a new executive for that matter, comrades, let's reflect. What do you think is going on here now? Because what you are seeing happening, people being assassinated is a new era. Yes, we know we didn't actually want to say we are going to run away from death. But tell me, what does this mean to us? How do we see this? And we had to take about an hour, talking to ourselves about what was happening and what we thought was happening and what we thought was giving or awakening us to the fact that death was a reality, whereas I think in the past we never thought it would actually, come onto us. Little did we know that, in the 3 weeks, Thulane would be gone. We were so shocked and traumatized when we heard he was gone, and we couldn't believe it until we went, on Sunday to mourn at Thulane's house, and indeed it came to us that this was a reality. The last 3 days have been very traumatizing, but very encouraging. Most of because Stanele was very strong yesterday in the memorial, where she had a strong voice and she sang to us. And she made us believe that, yes, Thulane did what he did for us as Swazi people. And we therefore cannot afford not to go on with the fight, despite all the atrocities. On Friday, we were at the regional police station where we went to petition, and unfortunately, again, 2 of our comrades were gunned down by, the crazy police, despite the fact that our petition was actually saying, what happened? Why are we being killed? Why is Thulane not here with us? Because we knew if he was around, he would be with us, even at any petition or any community that we're visiting to try and talk to the issues that the Swazi people are talking as an MSF chair. Today we were at the funeral, and we are happy that we've gone through this course, but at the back of our minds, we are saying, as Daniel said, that let Thulane's blood kindly the fact that Swazis want democracy and we must get democracy now. This is what we have in our minds to say, that is what we are calling for, to say we can never stop, even if death is on our face, even if death is at our door and we are killed, but we believe Swazis will not all be killed. We will survive. Some of us will survive, even if it means in the new generations, but Swazis must be free from autocratic Mswati and his rulers. I just want to also reflect something, that is personal between me and Thulane. Thulane was a humble but humane person. Most of the time he would, tease and laugh off a lot of things and try, to be very sarcastic sometimes. He liked calling me names, different names, but this particular time, he was calling me a name that I think I want to reflect on. He was lately calling me Mashigilisana. Mashigilisana is a name of the current army commander, the state army commander, Mashigilisana. I think his name comes from the fact that he is big-bodied, and you can see me in the picture. I am definitely a Mashigilisana. But Thulane was not only talking to me as Mashigilisana in that sense, but also in the sense that, he was saying he likes people who are persistent. He doesn't like us to be stopping on things that we have not got from the government. Let's push. He was always telling us to push for what we started. He was saying, we know what we want. There is no one that will make us go back unless we get what we want. So at any point in time, comrades, let's push and be making all Swazis to understand that this is a fight for us as Swazi people. And he was always reminding us that we are the people, the Swazi people must, in our own all selves, be the people that want to wage this fight for democracy. Sometimes as an MSF leader and chair, we would reflect on what the world or the solidarity that we're expecting from the world. And we felt we were not getting what we thought we would get. We were very happy in some small way, and I hope this will go on. When we saw even the diplomatic cause coming to Tulani's memorial yesterday, because this gave us hope to say, and we're hearing them all saying, Swaziland must dialogue now. And this is what to us says, yes, Tulani's death has brought some kind of hope to us, where even the world is now, the region is trying to say, definitely there is something wrong with Mswati not dialoguing with his own people. We hope this is going to be a push, not only from us, but from the world as well as the region. So as SADC, we are shattered that Tulani has had to go, when I think the Namibian president had actually started on talks to say, yes, Tulani and your team, come to me in Namibia because I want to hear your side. And for the first time, we're hearing someone actually saying he wants to hear us, because all the time we've been talking, no one wanted to listen. It is unfortunate that we then have to say Tulani must go, but it is a reality. Tulani has gone, but we want to actually say, we want to again take an oath on our own selves to say, we can never abandon what we believed in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade DP, and on behalf of the Multi-Stakeholder Forum for those reflections. I think that as we begin to wind down, I am very happy to have co-founded the Multi-Stakeholder Forum with Comrade Tulani Masego and the other comrades as referenced by President Mlungisi. And it is my my wish. Please mute yourself, Comrade DP. It is my wish that the message that has been relayed by everyone here, that Comrade Tulani was a unifying voice. He's been described as the glue that kept us together. And I want us to see this glue as glue that has not disappeared because he has been killed and taken from us. It is glue that still holds. And in his memory, let's make sure that we really do indeed unite all the forces of democracy in the country and understand, you know, the point at which we are as a nation, which has previously been described as a point of no return. We are at a point where we can no longer go back. We must therefore push until we get to our destination. So we are humbled by his massive contribution, and we are humbled to have worked with him. I want to invite Comrade President of the Political Parties Assembly, Comrade Nombulelo, to make her remarks very briefly so that we can close off. I know we had 2 hours, but we want to finish this way before that, to allow people to go back to their books and their readings. Over to you, President Nombulelo. Please unmute your video, and the floor is yours.
Good morning. It's good afternoon, everyone. It's indeed towards the night here. So, yeah, I'm Nombulelo, as Comrade Velap. He said, thank you so much for hosting me. So, I know Comrade Tulane I've known him for a short time, but the last time I was with him, it was the day before his untimely death. He called me and said, "Sibali, let's address the issue of Umlando, where the state denied the Kumalo family the right to give their son a decent send-off. He believed he also have a proper, dignified funeral. They may have stopped, but his passion for the love of Swaziland may not be taken away from us, and that idea will forever live." Comrade Tulane was a man of principle. He was so calm, yet determined and made sure everything was implemented. He worked well with everyone, and he was indeed a unifier. He always consulted whenever a decision must be taken. He was a straight talker. If understood the time and he understood the time and the realm of the revolution. He won't beat around the bush, but he would give direction if needed. He was always prepared to work when it arises, even in short notice. He rather assigned someone to do that task. He believed in democratic centralism. He would never take a sole decision for the masses. He wanted everyone in the country to know how evil the system of governance was. He organized dialogues to the communities just to hear the people what they think and would teach them about the new Swaziland he always dreamed of. He would teach with passion and would give them advice on how the new government should look like. I also remember whenever we had a problem, mostly students and other political activists, such that they were arrested, he will be the first one to come and monitor that situation and give them legal representation. He'll also help them out if they didn't afford. He was so selfless. He would make sure that no one goes with an empty stomach. He would provide money for transport and make sure everyone sleeps at home safe. Comrade Tulane was a fighter. He was so brave. Even when police denied us a go-ahead during the community dialogues, he would humbly negotiate for a peaceful settlement. But if he fails, he will leave that place peacefully. The only thing he wanted ever was a peaceful, all-inclusive dialogue for Emaswati. We know that in the revolution, there'll be heroes and the martyrs. Comrade Tulane is one of the martyrs of the revolution and will forever be recognized. His blood will indeed free the people of our country. His spirit will forever live in us. I consider myself lucky to know him as a person because he taught me how to stand with the truth and fight for what is right. He was persistent to get what you desire, which is democracy in our case. May his fighting spirit forever live. And I'd love to send this message to his wife, Comrade Daniel. I'd like to thank her for giving him support and love, which he had shown us in the revolution. For we know he drew most of his strength from you. Please find comfort in God's capable hands. Continue to support the struggle the way you did and make sure that your husband's effort does not go in vain. We'll forever make sure we realize the new Swaziland in our lifetime. May his revolutionary soul rest in power. Amandla.
Amanda, President, thank you so much, President, for those reflections. We really appreciate them. Comrade Starkey, I think we want to wrap up now the session, but I want to check if amongst our audience there is anyone who wants to speak, so that we can then play the last very short video. I think it's about 2 minutes for this. And then we can wrap up this memorial service on behalf of our comrade. Do we have anyone who wants to? make
So,
a
Comrade,
reflection.
Comrade Velaphi, there is Comrade Mandla who has his hand up.
Yeah, please allow him to speak, but I would like him to be very brief because we are at a point where we want to wrap up now. Please go ahead, Comrade Mandla.
Thank you, comrades. Greetings to everyone. Maybe I must start by thanking the president for representing us so well in the memorial. I thought his presentation was on point, and I also would like to thank everybody that has played a part to ensure that our comrade will have such a wonderful send-off. I just want to comment on two small issues. On the issue of our comrade. I've known Thulane since he was a student at the university. And perhaps being the elder of the comrades, I was actually very close to them. At a family level, he was also my personal lawyer. I've had very close relations with him, even in the work that he was doing for the liberation struggle. A point that I don't want us to miss is that Comrade Thulane was extremely reflective and very strategic. And part of that approach allowed him to be able to see that there is no violence that comes from the pro-democracy movement or from the liberation movement. No one can talk of violence coming from the liberation movement. No one can talk of terrorism coming from the liberation movement or from the mass democratic movement. The violence comes from the state. The only issue that Thulane was raising was that, in fact, the only thing you can raise is that society, members of the pro-democracy movement, liberation movements, they are also coming up with strategies of defending themselves from the violence of the state. I think it will be very important that we don't lose that intellectual appreciation of the struggle we're actually waging against the enemy. The violence is from the state, it's not from the people of Swaziland. It's not from their representatives. It's not from their leaders. And to me, that's a very important aspect of this human being called Thulane. Finally, I just want to say that right to his very last days, he was troubled around the decay in the leadership of our region in terms of them being able to identify and be honest with the Swazi struggle. I think as he is lying wherever he is, we owe him a big debt, and I hope we'll be able to develop a formal, properly conceptualized idea of who Thulane is as the basis for future education, particularly around the issue of human rights and advocates of our liberation, not just in Swaziland, in the region and in Africa. Thank you very much, comrades.
Thank you very much, Comrade Manda, for those very important reflections. And I think it's good that we are recording this on all Facebook platforms, and it will live as a permanent record of this giant that is Thulane Maseko. We have come almost to the end. I would like the Comrade Staki to play us the last video. But before then, I want to thank everyone who is here. I don't know, comrades, that if there is anyone else that I'm shutting off, please confirm that there are no hands.
No, I don't have any other extra hand comment.
I'm not seeing any from my end as well. So, but I want to thank my colleagues who have taken time to come and be with us here. My colleagues who are online. and other colleagues who are watching through Facebook as well. I know that it is a very busy time. Even for me right now, I have about 3 assignments to work on, but taking the time out to listen to the life of this gallant fighter of human rights and political freedoms and democracy and good governance is really appreciated, and want to thank everyone. And to remind you that if you want to honor him, my friend Kuno has helped us create a wonderful remembrance website, which is on Forever Missed. I think I posted it on my timeline on Facebook. Please go there and post your tributes. We'll post this recording also there as well as all the other materials that we have that will help us immortalize this giant and keep his memory and his inspiration alive, and prompt us to move forward ahead without hesitation towards the goal that we want to achieve. Thank you very much. We really appreciate your time. Comrade Staffy, please play the video, and then we will make final remarks and end the session.
I would like to read a small poem from a Lutheran pastor, Martin Nuala, who made a confessional prose at the end of the World War II. He said, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not care because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews. I also did not care because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and no one was there to shout, to speak for me." So my colleagues, fellow human rights defenders, all humankind, let us not wait for these people to come to you when there is no one to shout. Let us come together. Let us stand. Let us not allow for other Tulans to fall. Let us stand together. Let us seek justice. Let us seek justice and use justice as a way, as a deterrence for this brutality that is taking place in Eswatini. Human rights defenders in Eswatini, in our region, they are pushing peacefully for reforms. Reforms for democracy, for a rule of law, for respect of human rights. That's the only thing that human rights defenders are pushing for. Being a human rights defender, standing for human rights is not a crime. No person should pay for his life for standing for human rights. Thank you. Thank you. Ambakasha Tula. Thank you.
So these are images from his funeral earlier today in Swaziland. Thank you, Comrade Starkey, for preparing this for us. May the spirit of our brother live on. And indeed, Mswati will fall. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And deep appreciation to all the panelists, the speakers who made time to reflect today. Siyabonga kakhulu, thank you. And Tulane always said to us, the struggle continues. And indeed, the struggle never sleeps. Amanda, thank you, Comrade Stark.